So today I want to talk to you a bit about the Palestinian prisoners and how it is one of the most important facets for Palestinians, and how Israel actually uses imprisonment as a way to continue the colonization of Palestine, as well as to try to break down the Palestinian spirit. I'd like to start off first by talking about this gentleman here. His name is Arafat Jaladat. Can everyone see this? Is this even helpful? Okay. So Arafat Jaladat he's a young father, 30 years old, who is living in Sa'id near Hebron, a village near Hebron. He had two young children named Yara and Muhammad, and his wife was pregnant with their third. She was 4 months pregnant at the time of his arrest. Arafat was arrested last February. The Israeli army came and raided his home in Sa'id, and in the middle of the night, as they often do, they usually come and raid the homes after midnight, usually between 2 and 5 in the morning. So they raided it, broke down the door, kicked the family out of the house, and took Arafat away, blindfolded and handcuffed, and put him in a jeep. They had no search warrant, of course, and they had no arrest warrant, nor did the family know where Arafat was going. Now, Arafat was being held incommunicado for days before his lawyer was finally able to locate him. He was taken to Salem Military Court a few days after his arrest, and it was evident that he was being tortured during his interrogation. So Arafat told his lawyer that he was being held in Jalame Interrogation Center. This is an interrogation center that has equipment that is provided by the British company called G4S. And you might have heard around here that there's a lot of campaigns against G4S now, especially because of their complicity in the Israeli prisons and in the occupation overall. So I'll be letting you know which prisons are serviced by G4S when I'm talking about these stories. So Arafat was clearly being tortured by the interrogators. He told his lawyer that he was being beaten, that he was forced into the shabih position, meaning in the shabih position is when the prisoners are tied to a chair in stressed positions, either with their hands behind their back and blindfolded for long periods at a time. We've had prisoners who have actually become paralyzed from being put in this position for so long. And that he was being verbally harassed, and that he was in a really bad situation in the prison. And so the lawyer, of course, was trying to lobby on his behalf to either get him released, or at least to find out what the charges were against him, so that they could build a case for him and try to get him released. Unfortunately, that day in February was the last day that anyone ever saw Arafat besides his interrogator. 7 days after his arrest, he was found dead in a prison cell in Megiddo prison, and it was clear that he had been tortured to death. He had 3 fractured ribs. He had bruises all over his body, especially deep bruises along his spine. He had blood in his nose and in his mouth, and he had been tortured to death just 7 days after his arrest. I know this is definitely a bit of a horrific story, but it illustrates how the prisoners are being physically and psychologically tortured, and how imprisonment is used as a tool to break them down and to break the communities down. Now, even today, if you speak to Arafat's wife, Dalal, who ended up having her child this summer and named him after his father, his late father, and she's always extremely distressed when talking about the arrest, because when Arafat was arrested, they arrested him, took him to the jeep, and then brought him back to Dalal, to the family who was stranded outside but didn't know what was going on. And the interrogator told her, say goodbye to Arafat. This is the last time you're going to see him. And because they say this to families routinely, mothers and wives always want to remain strong in front of the prisoner. So she said, no, I'm not going to say goodbye to him. I will see him again. And now when she talks about the situation, she's so distressed because, indeed, she never did see him again after that night. So the issue of political prisoners is a huge issue and a central one to Palestinians. Since 1967, since occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, there's been over 800,000 Palestinians that have been arrested. That constitutes 20% of the population. or at least one person in each family. So you can imagine how this has such a deep impact on the society, on roles, family roles, and on the ability for families to be able to function and for society to be able to function. Not only this, 40% of the male population has been arrested at some point. So these are the breadwinners in families that have been taken from their families, forcing the families to often scramble to try to make a living and to survive as well, in addition to the psychological issues that occur from when there's someone in prison in the family. So, like Arafat, most prisoners are arrested during these midnight raids when the village or the home are surrounded by the Israeli occupation forces. A lot of times there's roundups in the village where all the men are taken to the middle of the village and arrested or interrogated in the village, and then a few are taken to interrogation centers, or many are taken to interrogation centers. And we see a lot of these roundups in villages that are close to settlements or that are close to this apartheid wall. And I'll talk a bit later, and I'll give a few case examples on how these areas are directly targeted to keep these people from speaking out against the colonization of Palestine and against the apartheid policies that are issued against them, and just to further embed the occupation. Now, according to Israeli law, Palestinians can be interrogated for up to 90 days, and 60 of those days they can have a lawyer's ban, where they're not allowed to ever meet with their lawyer, and of course not allowed to see anyone from the family. And it's during this time that research has shown with ex-prisoners that they are under such heavy interrogation and are being tortured both psychologically and physically that they are forced into giving confessions. And these confessions are a complete mockery of confessions in themselves. For example, we have represented a case where a 14-year-old child had been forced to confess under these conditions to throwing stones 5 or 6 times a day for the last 2 years, since he was 12 years old. So they had him sign a paper in Hebrew, a language that the child did not understand, without the presence of a lawyer or a parent, and they used this to try him in the military court. So about 95% of prisoners have testified that they have been psychologically or physically tortured. That includes isolation or solitary confinement. Usually when they're arrested right away, they're taken to a cell that's 2 meters by 2 meters, either with air conditioning blasting on them or lights on them 24/7 to completely disorient them from knowing what time it is, what day it is, or what's going on. They'll be denied showers or food. They'll be beaten, of course. They'll have sleep and sensory deprivation, threats against the lives of the family members, or for children sometimes threats of sexual violence or things like that. So we see this happen a lot. And Arafat is one of 73 prisoners who has died as a result of torture during an interrogation. That's a staggering number. So the prisons, and I wish this was a bit bigger. So the prisons are located, there's a small map here. There's about 17 prisons, and most of them are actually located inside Israel proper itself, which is a violation of international law. According to international law, in the case of an occupation, the occupied population should be interred inside the occupied territory for various reasons, including for access to the community, which is one of the main ones. However, in direct violation of international law, they're all located in Israel proper. In addition, there's 4 interrogation centers and 3 detention centers that are across the West Bank and Israel. And we say about 17 prisons here because there are times when prisoners are held in locations that are unmarked, that we don't even know about, that the prisoner does not even know about, which is extremely problematic as well. This issue continues to be a huge issue for Palestinians. Currently, right now, in the midst of the negotiations process brokered by John Kerry, there's over 5,000 Palestinians who are in prison right now. Of them, a little more than 150 are children. And if you've read the recent reports by Defense for Children's International, who collects the affidavits of children, they found that there's over 200 that were arrested in the second half of January alone. So we see a revolving door policy of people that are arrested and then released days later and so forth. And the reason for this is there's a new policy that we're noticing in the prisons themselves of an economic exploitation of the prisoners. So for example, the prisoners are taken through the Israeli military court system, which is a complete sham of international law and of human dignity in itself. So there's 2 military courts that prisoners are sentenced at. One of them is called Salem Military Court, and one of them is an Al-Fad military base, which also has the peripheral security by G4S. So prisoners are charged and they go through these court procedures. Usually the judge has very little training or no training. They're all in the Israeli occupation army, from the judge to the prosecution team to the security team, etc. To the translator. The translator is in the Israeli occupation military. For example, bless you. So the court hearings are actually held in Hebrew. So they have a translator from the military who I have seen myself translate only half of what's going on, what the judge is saying or what the lawyers are saying, or even interject his own opinion on what the prisoner should do when he's translating it back to him. Like, come on, that's a good deal, you should just take it. It's only 5 months in prison, something like that. I've seen translators go off and like get a sandwich or like take a phone call or play like on Facebook or something on their phone during the hearing when they're supposed to be translating. And I know this is a very small point, especially in the military court when there's a lot more violations going on besides the translator, but it just goes to show how these military courts are not even taken seriously in any aspect, and they are just used as a way to exploit the prisoner. So as I was saying, there's thousands of prisoners that get arrested every year. So the number of 5,000 prisoners currently in prison does not even capture the depth of the problem. So we have this revolving door policy where people will get arrested and then maybe released months later, or make a deal or a plea bargain where they will serve a certain amount of prison time and then also pay an extremely high fine in replacement of the remainder of the sentence, or in addition as punishment. And these fines are really high. They can be in thousands of shekels, which is a great part of the family's budget and their ability to live. And so then they'll be freed, and then they'll get rearrested and taken back through the system. And that's why we call it the revolving door policy, where this is constantly happening, where thousands are getting arrested on a yearly basis. Not only this, in the military court, things other than so-called security crimes are tried inside the military courts, which is also in violation of international law and what is supposed to be the use of a military court. For example, traffic violations are tried in the military court. I'm talking about speeding or not having your light or not turning on your blinker. You can go to prison for that in the Israeli military courts. Or trespassing, such as going to Jerusalem, for example. And things like this are actually tried in the military courts. And because of this revolving door policy, there's also an economic exploitation. So last year, there was 13 million shekels paid into the Israeli military court. I wrote the number down here somewhere. It's 2.2 million pounds. I can't remember how much that translates into euros, but it's a huge amount. Maybe 3 million euros. So that's 3 million euros that go into the Israeli military court system per year, from Palestinian pockets directly into the Israeli economy. It's absolutely absurd. Besides traffic violations, which have constituted 44% of new files last year, so this is increasingly becoming a way of exploiting the prisoners. There are several other charges that violate basic civic rights of Palestinians. So the West Bank is governed or controlled by over 1,600 military orders, Israeli military orders, and they really control every aspect of life, from being able to have a demonstration even in what they consider Area A, like Ramallah, for example, which is supposed to be under Palestinian Authority control. Even having a demonstration or calling for a demonstration or sharing a demonstration link on Facebook can get you arrested now. Carrying a Palestinian flag in Jerusalem is a basis for arrest. Being affiliated with a political party in any way, as all political parties that are part of the PLO are illegal, is grounds for arrest. And many other things. Throwing stones is illegal. And if you throw stones like at a tank, at an Israeli military tank, it's punishable for up to 20 years in prison. This is the charge that most children get, is throwing stones, whether it's at a wall, whether it's at an empty road, whether it's at a tank. So they're facing 10 to 20 years in prison. But of course, because of the revolving door policy, they'll be released earlier than 20 years. They'll be released in weeks or months, but they'll be put right back in prison. It's not uncommon for a child to have gone to prison 5-6 times by the time they're an adult. Even participating in like a charity event that is deemed to be affiliated with a political party is illegal and can get you put in prison. If the prisoner is not charged, then they will be put under something called administrative detention, which dates back to the British Mandate, which I'm guessing many people in here are familiar with the use of administrative detention in Ireland. So administrative detention is a policy where someone can be arrested and then held without charge or trial under a secret file that they nor their lawyer ever has access to, and they can be held indefinitely under this. So we have about over 100 prisoners now that are currently under administrative detention, but this number fluctuates drastically. For example, in the first and second Intifada, there were thousands of prisoners, including children, including women, under administrative detention. And I'd like to show the video now, but I think I'll let you explore yourselves when you go home. We have a website that's called stopadcampaign.com, and it has videos of ex-administrative detainees, including women, including human rights defenders, talking about how administrative detention affected their lives specifically and how it affected their family. And most administrative detainees say that it's actually worse than having a life sentence, because you never know when you're going to ever be released. You don't know if you will be released. You have no idea why you're being held, and you're held in prison indefinitely. So a lot of them will get either maybe a 1 or 2 month administrative detention order that will continuously be renewed several times. For example, this is a photo of Ahmed Katamish with his daughter Haneen. Ahmed Katamish is a political scientist, he's a writer, he's an academic, and he was under administrative detention for 2.5 years. He was just released a few months ago after a long battle in the courts. And Ahmed would always talk about how it was the hardest thing to be put under administrative detention. He has been both charged and under administrative detention because he never knew when he would ever see his family again, or if he would. And this is with his daughter after one of his releases on administrative detention. She wrote this quote, which I can read to you now, after one of his releases. And she said, "I hugged him then like I was meeting him for the first time, and I asked him to promise not to be gone for too long again. Being impeccably honest, he said, 'I wish I could. They must first get out of our lives before I can make such a promise.'" This is just to attest to how the policy of administrative detention hasn't changed. So even though we have just over 100 Palestinians under administrative detention, it is still a central issue, and until the policy changes, we will constantly be fighting administrative detention. So now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how imprisonment is used as a tool of control and also to break the Palestinian spirit and to break Palestinian resistance. And I'd like to start off by talking about this young 13-and-a-half-year-old child named Randa Wahbe. I'm not sure if many of you have heard about Randa Wahbe. He's a child from Silwan, and Silwan is a village that's near Jerusalem. And most of the homes in Silwan have either been demolished or have house demolition orders on them. It's a really grotesque situation in Silwan, and people are made homeless daily in Silwan. Muslim Wahbe's family also has a house demolition order on it, and they've basically just been waiting for their home to be demolished any day now. And this 13-year-old kid has been arrested at least a dozen times in his lifetime, in his short lifetime. Muslim Wahbe most recently was arrested in late 2013 on the charge of throwing stones. He was taken to Muscovia Interrogation Center, which is a center also serviced by G4S, where he was roughed up like most children are. Muslim Wahbe said that he was verbally abused and that he was beaten. He's routinely arrested, and he always says that he's treated the same without any regard. Now, when Muslim Wahbe was released days later, when he was released days later, he was released on a very high bail, of course, like most children are. And the judge told him, okay, we're releasing you this time on bail, but next time if you get arrested, we're going to hold you for a really long time. So they used these threats against children to break down their resistance. Now, maybe Muslim's mother is not going to let him go out to a demonstration again against the house demolitions in their own village because she's afraid that her son will get arrested. Or maybe he's not going to take it to the high court that his home is being confiscated, that his land is being confiscated, in fear of getting arrested. So you see, this is part of the bigger picture that there's people who are arrested specifically to break down any resistance. And just to talk a little bit about children in general, since 2000 and since the start of the second Intifada, that we have found that there's 8,000 Palestinian children that have been detained, including this little kid named Mohammed. He's a Palestinian-American child whose case was with Adamir, and he was arrested for throwing stones. They came and arrested him from his home in the middle of the night, and he told us that, so he had braces. This is an older photo of him, but at the time of his arrest, he had braces. And he had a hearing every few days where the judge kept extending his interrogation because this child was put under extreme pressure, and they were asking him for information about who's going to demonstrations in your village, who's active in your village, who's writing certain things, who's telling you to go throw stones, etc., to try to get information on others to continue the process of arrest. So when we were going to Muhammad's hearings, and every hearing we would notice that he was missing braces. They were actually literally pulling off his braces off of his teeth during an interrogation. He's 14 years old. He lived half of his life in the United States and half of his life in Palestine. He's a kid like me, basically, and he was put under this extreme pressure. Now you can even think of this as part of the greater scheme. His parents were absolutely terrified and now might be thinking about sending their entire family back to the United States, considering that they can go there after he was arrested in front of all of his younger siblings, who were ages 5, 6, 7, and really young, and were traumatized by their brother being taken in the middle of the night for a few weeks. Children have, of course, reported torture. 60% are arrested in the middle of the night. The rest are usually arrested on their way home from school or even on the playground, etc. 90% are blindfolded at the arrest. 75% subjected to physical violence. And I think this is actually the most shocking, is that a third of them are actually strip searched. These are young children who are being strip searched by an adult. The statistics really speak for themselves on how horrific that is. We have the arrests of human rights defenders and those that go to demonstrations. There's widespread arrests in villages like Bil'ain, Nebi Saleh, etc. that are fighting against the settlements and the apartheid wall. This is a photo of Bassem Tamimi. He's from the village of Nabi Saleh. Bassem has been arrested countless times, him and his wife Nariman Tamimi, and many others in the village. So Bassem, in the village of Nabi Saleh, has weekly demonstrations because half of their land and their water spring was actually confiscated, and on top of it was built the illegal settlement of Halmish. So they have these popular protests every week where they walk up to where the settlement is and demonstrate and put out signs, and a lot of internationals go to these demonstrations, etc. And Bassem has been arrested countless times for incitement for putting together these demonstrations. And the way that they have arrested Bassem and so many others from the village is that they arrest the children first, and then they subject the children to torture and put them in these interrogations, and then they take down the names of everyone in the village who has ever gone to the demonstration and then round them up and arrest them. So they also are pitting Palestinians against each other in the villages and traumatizing the children, who are then forced to face that other people in the village are arrested and detained because of the so-called confession. And then we have the issue of Palestinian Legislative Council members. This is a photo of Yasser Mansour, who is one of 9 PLC members who's under administrative detention. Now, since 2006, since the election of the Palestinian Legislative Council for the first time, the PLC members were actually round up in mass and arrested, and most of them were put under administrative detention. Some of them were charged with membership in an illegal organization. And because of the mass detention of the PLC members, the PLC basically fell apart and hasn't convened since 2007, hindering any legislative process for Palestinians. We have the attacks on civil society organizations who work on human rights issues and on prisoners' issues. For example, I can give you my own personal experience. This is a photo that I took at Adamir from when I started working there 18 months ago. Since I started working at Adamir, in less than 2 years, we've had 3 staff members arrested, one of them put under administrative detention, and the other 2 arrested for, one of them for attending demonstrations, and one of them, the evidence against him, he was a lawyer, Anas Barghouti, and he was charged with telling his clients about what happened under interrogation. And somehow they tried to link that to membership in an illegal organization. Now the reason, like if you look deeper into what are the reasons that these 3 people are getting arrested. For example, in the case of Anas is very influential in the Palestinian youth movement. For example, he's always at demonstrations. He's always helping other youth who are getting arrested or interrogated or get slips saying to come to interrogation for one day. He provides them free counseling. He's very nashit. He's very active politically. And so to arrest him and give him this flimsy charge is basically just to isolate him from the community and to try to threaten him from being involved in the community. Of course, that doesn't work. This is a photo that I took when our office was raided in December 2012. And the Israeli occupation forces came in the middle of the night to our office and several other Palestinian civil society organizations, including the Boycott National Campaign office, and raided it, took computers, took files, took information off of our servers, ransacked it. It took us weeks to just put together our office back together, but even longer to get back all the information. Because even little things to hinder our work, for example, our lawyers, like defense lawyers, are only allowed to copy the files from the prosecution team on certain days during certain hours from the military court. They have to pay for them too, actually, to get the evidence. So we had to go back and determine, okay, which files are missing, which files do we need to get evidence for, and then instead of actually being able to build cases, just go back and actually re-attain the evidence. I use use the term evidence very loosely, by the way, because sometimes it's like Twitter feeds or Facebook statuses and things like that, or photos from the internet, or nothing at all. Not only this, much of our staff has travel bans. The head of the board of directors has a travel ban from coming to Ramallah, so he's banned from coming to the office that he is supposedly directing. So just to illustrate that there's like intense pressure even on organizations that should function normally for human rights cannot function. So to switch a bit, I want to talk a bit about the conditions inside the prisons. Of course, in the prisons, there's absolutely terrible conditions. There's overcrowding, there's humidity, there's pest issues, there's a serious lack of the availability of food, and so prisoners are forced to buy everything that they need from the canteen, including food, including blankets, including clothing, including hygiene products or cleaning products for the cell. They purchase everything at 2 to 3 times the price in the market. So this is also another form of economic exploitation inside the prison. How can the prisoners even purchase things? Who's providing the money? So the families of the prisoners actually have to deposit money for the prisoner on a monthly basis so that they can be able to buy basics like toothpaste or food. And this has actually cost Palestinian society 12 million shekel a year, or probably like 2.4, I think it's 2.4 million euro, 2 million pounds, which is absolutely insane because this is even more money that is putting Palestinians further and deeper into poverty. And if you think about it even deeper, it causes the Palestinian society to start thinking about how they're going to live day to day, to be able to make this money to send to the prison. So it moves everything from the collective to the individual so that families can survive. And this is another way of trying to break down resistance of the family and to break the will of the Palestinians. There we go. Another huge issue that prisoners face inside the prisons is medical negligence. And now we've had 53, the statistic is slightly inaccurate after last week. We have 53 prisoners who have died from medical negligence in the prisons, including this gentleman, Maysara Abu Hamdiya, who had cancer and who was denied being able to see a doctor for years. And by the time they finally allowed him to see a doctor a few weeks before he died, it was obviously already too late, and he ended up dying surrounded by soldiers, not able to see his family, not able to say goodbye to his loved ones before he passed from cancer. And medical negligence takes on many forms, whether it's intentional delay in treatment, like the case of Maysara, whether it's giving prisoners the wrong medicine, whether it's actually basically dissuading prisoners from going to the prison clinic, because oftentimes prisoners tell us that they use the prison clinic as a point of coercion, where they'll say, we'll give you medicine or we'll give you treatment if you give us information on so-and-so inside the prison. So this dissuades them from going. They don't want to be subjected to this kind of interrogation in the medical clinic, nor do they want to go to the clinic and then come back and have everyone in their cell think that they might have collaborated with the occupation. So there's like a two-way line here of how the medical clinics are used. So a lot of prisoners actually also don't even go to the clinic because they don't see it efficient, effective, and they're afraid of collaboration. And we know that maybe over 1,000 prisoners actually suffer from some kind of illness where they're not being treated, and at least 25 from cancer. This is a photo of Jihad al-Tawil, who actually was martyred just a week and a half ago while I've been on this tour. Jihad is an older man. He was in prison in Bir al-Sabi' prison, which is in South Palestine in the desert, and he was serving 3 months for a traffic violation. During his imprisonment, just a few weeks ago, the Special Forces, a unit that is part of the Israeli prison service, went in and raided the cell that he was in, beating prisoners, removing them from the cell, and throwing tear gas canisters into the cell, and then closing it. And because Jihad al-Tawil was so affected by the tear gas, and he desperately needed medical aid, and he needed oxygen, and he was denied treatment for a week. And a week after, they finally transferred him to a hospital, but it was already too late. And he actually just died just a week and a half ago from complications from the tear gas. Now, this is common practice. It's absolutely horrific. The special services go into the prisons regularly and raid them, including the children's prisons. And prisoners come back and tell us that sometimes they'll throw a tear gas canister, close the door, and all of them basically think they're going to die. And then they'll open it and then throw an oxygen, some kind of oxygen thing so that they can get oxygen, but just as they're really thinking that they're going to die. It's psychological torture inside the prison. It's not just at the point of interrogation or point of arrest, but really throughout the imprisonment. Whether it's actual psychological torture like the tear gas, whether it's the fact that the prisoner feels like a burden on the family because the family has to provide them money on a monthly basis, whether they feel guilty for not being with their family. So this is a way to break them down psychologically. We also have the case of Said Halahle, who was a former hunger striker. He went on a 77-day hunger strike in 2012 because he was under administrative detention. And like many prisoners, he was released and then rearrested and charged instead of put under administrative detention. And after he was charged, he went to go get some dentistry work, and they used non-sterile tools, and from that he contracted hepatitis. We have a lot of women that get detained. We have mothers that give birth inside the prison where they're only unshackled literally during the delivery process and then shackled to their beds again. And then they're not afforded any special treatment. They're allowed to keep their infant with them, but they're not afforded any food, a larger cell, privacy, prenatal vitamins, a special doctor, and it's very dangerous for them and for the child. Women also, of course, you can probably imagine that the use of sexual threats is used against women very often, where sometimes at the point of arrest they won't allow the woman to get her hijab on, for example, or they will threaten her to sexually assault her, or they will have a male soldier strip search her, which we've had cases of all of these recently. So these are another way to kind of control them as well. Currently we have 17 women in prison, but this number also fluctuates depending on what's going on in Palestine. It can go up a lot or it can go down. And we have a lot of cases of women who are taken to prison for only several days, and so they're not calculated into this number. We have the issue of family visits, which is also used as a way to isolate the prisoners. So a prisoner so I'll give you Israeli law first. So according to the law, prisoners are allowed 2 visits a month. They're 45-minute visits, and they're brokered by the Red Cross, by the ICRC. However, in practice, and they're only allowed first-degree relatives, so parents, wife, children, basically. However, in practice, many of these prisoners are denied family visits. And the way that they deny them is that they consider the family members so-called security threats and therefore don't give them permits to go to the prison. Because the prisons are all illegally inside Israel, the family members actually have to apply for a permit to enter the state of Israel, as well as a permit from the Red Cross to be able to go visit the family member. So they're routinely denied to enter the state of Israel. For example, once the child turns 16, they are denied, and males are almost always denied. So usually it's only the mother that's allowed to visit the prisoner. And family visits are also used as a punitive measure. A lot of times, if there's any small infraction in the prison at all, for example, the prisoner says he doesn't want the prison food that day, they'll tell him he doesn't have family visits for 2 months or something like that. Or when they start a hunger strike, the first thing that they do to the prisoner is deny them family visits for several months to continue to isolate them from their family members. Prisoners from Gaza from 2006 until 2 summers ago were denied family visits completely because they were from Gaza. And it wasn't until the prisoners engaged in a long hunger strike, a mass hunger strike, that the prisoners from Gaza were allowed family visits. Of course, same procedure where they have to apply to the state to enter the state. Many are denied, a few are let in. But these rights are taken away regularly. For example, they were instated in the summer of 2012, and then in November, when Israel attacked Gaza, they revoked the family visits for Gaza prisoners again. Prisoners are also used as political exploitation. This is a photo from a prisoner's release that happened a few months ago as part of the ongoing negotiations. So during these negotiations, the Israeli government has said that 104 prisoners that were arrested before Oslo, before 1993, will be released. So, of course, these prisoners should have been released before Oslo even started, as we've seen in Ireland, as we've seen in South Africa, and countless other cities. However, the prisoners have been used as a bargaining chip since the beginning of the negotiations, since 1993. This isn't the first time that they've been used. In Oslo, prisoners were used as a bargaining chip, and every other agreement since. But especially in this prisoners' agreement, so we've been documenting how many prisoners have actually been arrested since the negotiations were announced. You know, they're saying this is the final status, that we're serious this time, and that we're releasing these 104 prisoners to show that we're serious. There's been over 2,000 Palestinians that have been arrested since the end of July, when John Kerry announced that announced the negotiations, showing that there's no change in policy. And we know this. We see there's settlement expansion. The wall is expanding. And also, prisoners are continuing to get arrested. I mean, right after the announcement of the negotiations, there were mass arrests where there's over 20 or 30 prisoners, people getting arrested every day. So it's just to draw on the point that prisoners are used as a bargaining chip and are not actually, this isn't actually a goodwill gesture. Not only this, Israel has created a law under a military order. It's Military Order 1651, Article 186, that is provision specifically for prisoners that are released, such as in these prisoner releases or in prisoners' exchanges. In 2011, there was a prisoner exchange where over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were exchanged for Gilad Shalit, who was a soldier that was captured in Gaza. And so this article says that any prisoner who is released in these so-called amnesties can be rearrested and then will serve the remainder of their previous sentence. So it's a way to just release them provisionally until they are able to rearrest them. Now we've had over a dozen who are currently in prison fighting this military order. Many of them have gone on a hunger strike, including Samir Isawi. You might have heard about Samir Isawi. Last year he was on a very long hunger strike. He was just released in December after basically, being on the verge of death. His health had deteriorated so badly. Now, Samet Isawi, a lot of people ask us, how was he on hunger strike for over 6 months? He was obviously not on a full hunger strike like we would, like many consider hunger strike, which is just water and salt. He was on hunger strike and getting vitamin supplements. Now, this is still, of course, considered a hunger strike politically and under the official definition. But also, the reason that he even started taking vitamins is because they started threatening him with force feeding and started showing him the force feeding tubes that they were going to force feed him with. And there's for Palestinians, prisoners remembered in the 90s when prisoners actually died from force feeding because the tubes went into their lungs and they actually choked to death. So in any case, Samet and many others will choose to take these vitamins and have a slow death, just to be able to hopefully to keep that hope alive that they will be released. Fortunately, Samet Isawi was released back to his home in Jerusalem after being detained for a couple of years since he was released in the prisoners' exchange. Others were not as lucky as him. For example, there was another prisoner named Ayman Sharaune who was on hunger strike at the same time as Samet. Similar situation, he was from Hebron. He was deported to Gaza for 10 years. So his entire family, his wife and children, are in Hebron. He's in Gaza and he will not see them for at least 10 years. We're seeing this more often in hunger strikes, that prisoners will get deported or displaced after engaging in a hunger strike. For example, we had a female administrative detainee named Hana al-Shalabi who was displaced to Gaza against her will while she was on hunger strike and until now has not been able to see her family. There's a lot of, in addition to mass hunger strikes, which happen regularly, the last one in 2012, which I'll get to in a moment, there's a lot of individual hunger strikes like Samet's, like Ayman's, like Hana's. Currently there are 6 prisoners on hunger strike and there's 1 unconfirmed, so there's potentially 7 prisoners on hunger strike. 4 of them are on hunger strike since the middle of January because of administrative detention. They are demanding that they be released and the administrative detention policy be changed. And 2 of them are actually long-term prisoners who have been detained since 2002. And they are, just at the end of last year, they were actually taken for reinterrogation and recharged, and now are going to be facing new sentences, in addition to their life terms. So they are on hunger strike against this policy and against the policy of isolation. They were put in isolation for months at a time as well. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what our stance at Damir is and what we are doing here on this tour and what we hope to get out of this tour and to work with you as well. So because of all of the policies that I've described and the way that the military court system functions, we as an organization, despite being an organization that provides free legal aid in these systems, actually calls for the boycott of these systems, for a collective boycott of us, of the Ministry of Prisoners Affairs, and all the other civil society organizations so that we can have this system collapse. And we also support and call for the boycott of G4S as well as we prepare for the boycott of the military courts. And so that's why we're here today, is actually to convince you to work with us on this G4S campaign and to work more on the prisoners issue so we can really bring the prisoners issue up to light. G4S, if you don't know, is a British-Danish company that is one of the largest security firms in the world. They provided the security for the Olympics a few years ago, and they're providing the security for the cell that Arafat Jaradat was interrogated in and tortured in and found dead in, for the Muscovia detention center where Muslim Ode was interrogated, for the Ofat military complex, for the military base where they have all the military courts and where the administrative detainees are held. So they're completely complicit in the prison system and in the occupation, and we want to kick them off all the campuses at the universities and out of all the cities, and to really isolate them. And this isn't just a call from us or from activists, this is actually a call from the prisoners themselves. In 2012, there was a mass hunger strike where about 1,200 prisoners engaged in it, calling for basic rights like the end of administrative detention, for family visits, for the end of isolation, and for improving the conditions in the prisons. But they also called on the international community to come together and to boycott G4S so that we can get them out of the prisons and to highlight the prisoners' case. So I think I'll end there, and if you have any questions, and we really hope that we can work with you more in Adamir, and we hope to see your faces. Hope if you can come to Ramallah, to Palestine, to see what's happening on the ground and bring it back to your communities, because a lot of the work is done here. I spoke a bit about the students at Galway University a while ago, but actually this tour has targeted several universities across the UK and Scotland who have managed to pass bills that are against G4S and to divest from G4S on their campuses, and we want to expand it to the communities as well. So if you have any questions, and we hope to see you soon.